My father cheated on my mother and became violent toward us, but he insists on walking me down the aisle, and I told him I'd rather have a stranger do it than him. Throwaway account because my family knows my main. As the title says, I'm 24 years old. 4 years ago, I lost my temper during a family dinner and told my 56-year-old father that I would rather have a stranger walk me down the aisle than him. Some background: my father always wanted my brother and me to have traditional weddings. Ever since I was a little girl, he would tell me how much he looked forward to the day he would walk me down the aisle, and back then I shared his excitement. However, that changed the day I found out he had cheated on my mother. The affair happened only once, but he stayed in contact with the woman for more than a year before my mother found out. That completely changed how I saw him. And although my mother decided to forgive him, his behavior afterward only made me feel more disgust toward him. He became more aggressive, often turned to alcohol, and basically became a stranger. Things got worse when I entered my teenage years, and now that I'm in my 20s and have thought more about my future wedding, I'm absolutely certain that I don't want him walking me down the aisle, even though I know how much it would hurt him. Instead, my brother and I agreed that he would be the one to walk me down the aisle, because he was the real father figure while I was growing up. This is where the problem started. I don't talk to my father much anymore, but about once a year my mother organizes a family dinner. Since they're still together, my father is always there. Unfortunately, he usually uses these occasions to get drunk and complain about how sad it is that we don't talk to him anymore. The only reason I still go to these dinners is because I love my mother and don't want her to feel like I'm abandoning her. I've tried to organize outings with just my mother, but my father always forces his way into those plans, and in my opinion, it's not worth the fight. Yesterday, however, I finally snapped. During dinner, the topic of marriage came up. My brother recently proposed to his fiancée and was talking to my mother about some wedding plans. My father, already drunk, said that he couldn't wait to walk me down the aisle when I eventually got married. I immediately apologized and told him that I had already decided that my brother would be the one to walk me down the aisle. I added that instead, he could walk my mother down the aisle before I entered, so he could still have his moment too. After a long pause, my father started yelling. He called me an ungrateful brat and said he couldn't believe I would repay him like that after everything he had done to raise me. I stayed quiet while he ranted at me, but when he said I should feel lucky that he still wanted to walk me down the aisle after how I had treated him, I exploded. I told him I would rather have a stranger walk me down the aisle than him, and that he would be lucky if he was even invited to the wedding. I know my words were harsh, but I was tired of being attacked. When I finished yelling, my father broke down and started sobbing. He kept repeating that I was a terrible person for taking that away from him and asking how I could do this to him after everything. I couldn't take it anymore and left the dinner shortly after. Today, my mother has been bombarding me with messages saying I shouldn't have said those things, that I know how my father is and what alcohol does to him, and that I should have stayed quiet. My brother is on my side, but I know my mother has a point. I've seen my father under the influence, and I know the best way to deal with it is to stay silent. Still, when he said those things about me, I couldn't hold back. So, Reddit, am I the bad one for telling my father that I'd rather let a stranger walk me down the aisle and that he'd be lucky to even be invited to the wedding? Edit 1. My father struggled with a nicotine addiction when we were kids and fixed it, in quotes, by turning to alcohol. He went to rehab for a while, and that's where he met his mistress. When he was caught, he took it out on us. We were told to just move on from the affair, and if we ever brought it up, my father would either break down crying or become aggressive. My mother is completely financially dependent on my father, and although she's always denied it, sometimes I think that's the only reason she stayed. As for the abuse, my father didn't really seriously physically hurt my brother or me. When he was very drunk, he would slap us, but my mother always managed to stop him, so it never became serious, technically. Although, I don't know if this counts as verbal or another kind of abuse, but he often drove dangerously when he was angry with us in the car, complained about our attitudes, or yelled at us, mainly when he was drunk. He also kicked my brother out of the house at 16 and me right after I turned 17. These are just some things I remember right now, but I'm sure my brother has more stories from when we lived with him. Edit 2. Regarding what I said in the original post and how my mother may look bad in this situation, when we were teenagers she always protected us whenever he got physical and defended us when he came into our rooms at midnight just to yell. She has always been my support system, along with my brother, and I don't know what I would do without her in my life. I don't know how much she has had to endure. Now that we no longer live at home, many comments say that I should cut contact with her as well, but then I wouldn't know how to make sure she's safe and being taken care of. Edit 3. My brother and I tried to convince him, when he was sober, to consider going back to rehab. My mother doesn't want him to go because that's where he met his mistress. He doesn't want to go either, saying it didn't help the first time. I often think about simply cutting him out of my life, but then I wouldn't have any way of knowing whether my mother is safe. I don't trust my father with her. Update 1. Only about 2 days have passed since I told my alcoholic father that he wouldn't be the one walking me down the aisle, and since then things have only gotten worse for my brother and me. Reading all the comments helped me realize that my mother, although she protected us from most of the abuse, was still an enabler and never truly showed signs of stopping my father's behavior. Still, she's my mother, and I didn't want to immediately jump to no contact. I talked it over with my brother, and we decided the best thing would be to have one last conversation with my mother alone. I finally replied to her messages, basically telling her that we needed to talk without my father present, and that if he showed up, I would leave and would have to consider going no contact. She agreed, and we decided to meet at a nearby cafe for lunch at my request. I arrived first, and my mother arrived about 15 minutes later with, yes, you guessed it, my father by her side. Maybe I was naive to think she would keep the agreement, but I truly trusted that she would come alone. I stood up and left the cafe. As hard as it was, I followed through on my threat and blocked her on everything. I thought that would be the end of it. However, this morning she showed up at my door, this time without my father. She looked so disheveled and lost that I couldn't close the door on her, so I invited her in. We had a long talk. I told her how much damage her behavior had caused my brother and me, that my father would remain out of our lives until he had been sober for at least a year, and that she finally needed to start encouraging him to get better or leave him. Otherwise, we would go no contact with her as well. I told her that if she ultimately decided to divorce him, my brother and I would be there to support her financially and emotionally. We ended up talking for about 2 hours, most of it spent crying. During that conversation, my mother revealed the real reason she never left my father. She was the one who had an affair first. It was with a coworker at her old job as a waitress. Instead of leaving her, my father told her they could stay together if she followed his rules. Basically, he was allowed at least one free pass, she wasn't allowed to talk to any men, she had to quit her job, and she had to give him full access to her finances. If she broke any of his rules or tried to leave, he would tell his extremely anti-infidelity family what she had done and would do everything possible to ruin her life. When she finished telling me this, I tried again to convince her to just leave him, telling her that she would still have my brother and me. The revelation that my mother had also cheated hurt me deeply, but at that moment all I wanted was for her to leave my father. Despite my efforts, my mother apologized for everything she had done to us but said she was going to stay with him. Now I feel like I've lost both of my parents, and I've been crying all day. This isn't what I wanted from this situation, but at least I still have my brother. I hope I'll be able to move on someday, but for now I just want to rest. Sorry for any grammatical errors, I just needed to vent. Thank you all for your support, and I'll update if anything changes. Thank you. Edit 1. I've received many comments saying it seems like I'm perfectly fine with my mother's affair, so I want to clarify something quickly. I am in no way siding with my mother or defending her infidelity. I just wanted to get her out of a toxic marriage that is toxic on both sides. But she is an adult, and ultimately she chose to stay. Now the only thing I will do is try to make sure I don't become like them and hope that both of them get the help they need. I still don't love my father because he was abusive toward us. However, now I'm also aware that my mother isn't much better. I feel sympathy for both of them because of their situations, but I don't agree with any of their actions. While writing this post, I had no idea how much my mother's infidelity affected my family's life and my father's behavior afterward. Reading the comments helped me understand just how horrible their actions were, and I'm not defending or supporting them. I'll need some time to process this information, because I now have a new perspective on the years I spent believing my father was the villain and my mother the hero. Please be patient while I process this. I also told my brother everything, and he is also seeking therapy to move forward. I hope this clears some things up, and I'll answer questions in the comments. Edit 2. In case it wasn't clear, I have gone no contact with both parents. Edit 3. I have a therapy session scheduled for later this week. I have no intention of becoming my father, and I will do whatever I can to make sure I don't end up repeating his behavior. I let my emotions take over in how I handled things with my mother, which isn't an excuse, but I hope I can prevent that pattern from continuing in my life. Edit 4. I believe my mother's affair came to light during a visit while my father was in rehab, when he asked for his free pass. He already knew who he wanted to have an affair with. My mother agreed to only one, because that's what she did, and that's why, when it was revealed that he continued to stay in contact with his mistress, she got angry. I don't know if they slept together again. My father had already started drinking alcohol every other night after leaving rehab, probably because of my mother's infidelity, but I think the way we treated him when we found out made him turn exclusively to alcohol to cope. I don't support my mother's decision to cheat, and my view of her has changed drastically. However, whether she cheated or not, she is still in a dangerous situation with my father, and making sure she's safe should take priority over my feelings. I also keep remembering all the good years I had with my mother after the affair, and although that was probably because she was never exposed, I can't help but associate her with those memories, while I associate my father with his alcoholism because that's all I remember of him. I hope that answers the question, but if not, let me know and I'll try to answer as best I can. Update 2. The dust hasn't settled since cutting off both parents, but before what happened next, there's something I did. I couldn't get what my mother told me out of my head, nor the fact that they had kept lying to me my entire life. So I could expect more secrets that would take years to come out. I found the woman my father slept with. I wasn't even sure I should send a message, but my fingers did it before my brain could think it through. I was brief, who I was, that I wasn't looking for a fight, just information. In the worst case, I wouldn't get a reply. But she replied within an hour. Her version matched what I already knew, until she told me something darker. She said it had only been once. Yes, but for him it wasn't just once. He kept texting her at parties and late at night. When she blocked him, he showed up at her workplace to talk, acting like it was normal, because he told her that his marriage had been restructured after my mother cheated on him. He made it sound as if they were in an open marriage. She said he wasn't aggressive in the way people usually imagine aggression, but he didn't accept no for an answer and had a way of making you feel like you owed him a conversation. That situation ended with her telling her manager, and security escorted him out without making a scene. The last time he texted her was a few weeks ago from a new number, asking how she was. She didn't respond. Reading those messages made me feel sick. I believe her. It was like seeing the same pattern, just from another angle. 2 nights later, my brother's fiancé's parents hosted a small engagement dinner. It wasn't formal, but my father wasn't invited, and we didn't tell my mother either because we were just as angry with her as with him. The night went well until we were leaving, and my brother froze at the door. I looked up and there was my father at the edge of the driveway, leaning against his car, with that posture he gets when he's had 3 drinks and is trying to look sober. He said my name and opened his arms like I was supposed to run to him. I didn't move. My brother stepped between us, and my father started saying that now that the truth about my mother was out, there was no need to hold a grudge anymore. The host came out, then a neighbor, and enough people were around that he backed off. He left muttering, and I went home shaking. I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m. someone knocked on my door. When I asked who it was my mother. She had fled from my father after he came back from our encounter and became violent. The difference this time was that she couldn't even control him. While we were talking, I got an alert saying unknown accessory detected moving with you. I don't use those things, but I have an iPhone and my mother doesn't. When we checked her purse, there was an AirTag hidden in the lining of a small inner pocket she never uses. I was still angry with her, but I couldn't let her go back to my father's house and then live with myself if he killed her or something happened. I let her stay the night. In the morning, we drove to her house to pick up some things. We waited until my father was at work and made sure his car wasn't in the driveway. She grabbed a bag and her documents from a drawer that I later realized had a false bottom. She had hidden them there, her birth certificate, bank statements with balances, some cash and small bills. She had been hiding it for an emergency. We were packing photos and some clothes when we heard the door. My mother looked at me like now what, and my body reacted before my brain did. I called my brother and said, "Come now." Then I started recording on my phone and hid it so he wouldn't see. My father came in very angry because my mother hadn't spent the night at home and he thought she was cheating again, but when he saw the bags, which took less than 10 seconds, it got much worse. I'll never forget how fast his face changed. He said my mother's name once, then grabbed her wrist so hard I thought he was going to break it. I stepped between them and hit him with my bag, which was heavy enough to make him let go, and we locked ourselves in the bathroom. I locked the door and called the police immediately. My brother arrived much sooner than they did and started arguing with him. He told us we could come out and that he would make sure he didn't hurt us. He followed us to the car, and for a second I thought he was going to attack us, but my brother stood in between. We waited for the police to arrive and filed a report. He wasn't arrested at that moment, but at least they took our statements and his. After that, we went to my brother's house in case my father decided to show up at mine while we were alone. We decided my mother would stay with him for a few days, first for safety and second because everything that happened doesn't erase what happened before. It was like I could separate the victim and my mother, and my instinct was only to help the victim, but as for my mother herself, there are so many things wrong that I don't know if they can ever be fixed. I'm just glad I did something, because I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if he had killed her. That's all for now. My brother and I are also thinking about what we'll do with her once things calm down, maybe help her get a restraining order and then find her somewhere to stay. He's not happy with her either. We thought about calling a relative to take her in, but his fiancée asked that she stay, and we don't have many options right now. Edit 1, yes, I remember saying we would help her financially if she divorced my father, but that was before she chose him over us again. When she did, that offer disappeared. My brother and I talked about a situation like this on the day of the engagement party. Our fear is that after helping her, she would go back to him again. This is an extreme situation with violence involved, so we've changed our plans. Once things stabilize, our mother can go back to him or rebuild her life, but without our help. Edit 2, I've been staying with a friend for a few days, though I go back to my apartment during the day to get things and make sure no one has broken in. Everything is normal for now. Update 3, we did a civil standby to collect my mother's belongings. It was like scheduling a storm. The officer waited 2 houses down and escorted us for safety. I wish we could have done this sooner, but without a report they couldn't provide resources. My mother had witnessed my father's violence earlier that day but hadn't recorded it. I had. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but maybe enough for a restraining order. When we arrived, my mother's key jammed because she was nervous. The officer told her to calm down and said he was prepared. All the picture frames in the hallway were face down. My father wasn't there, but we moved quickly. We got a lot out, but other things were missing, probably taken by my father out of spite. The officer told my mother to make a list of what was missing and give it to his sergeant and her lawyer. We were inside less than half an hour, then went back to my brother's house. I left my mother there and went to work. My father broke the silence 2 days later in the least surprising way. He called my brother from a new number and left a voicemail where he cried, coughed, and said this was our last chance to do the right thing. The next day, my mother had her appointment to request a restraining order. She went with my brother and presented all the evidence. They denied an emergency order because the situation wasn't considered dangerous enough, but they granted her a court hearing, and after arguing her case, she was given a 1 to 2 year restraining order. I think things are finally calming down in some way, and I no longer have to write about my father's violent outbursts. My mother is filing for divorce, something I never thought I would see. All of this means that soon she'll have to leave my brother's house. We've done enough to protect a woman who was suffering domestic violence in her home. But when it comes to the kind of person my mother is, we can't do the same. My brother is talking to some relatives on her side of the family, because my father's side is a clear no. He's telling the full story, including the infidelity, which her family really does not like. We're confident that someone will give her a place to stay for a while until she can get back on her feet. We could leave out the infidelity part, but just because she is now the victim, we don't think it would be fair to hide information that's relevant. It's not information that puts her in danger, but it does carry some responsibility for what is happening. At least she is lucky that her lawyer took the case pro bono because she works with domestic violence cases. Edit, we are not victimizing our mother, but we cannot lie when people ask why she is getting divorced. It even harms us, because while no one wants her staying in their homes, we are the ones who have to take responsibility. It's not that she has nowhere to go and we are spreading gossip just to make her life harder. If that were the case, we wouldn't have helped her leave my father's place. Update 4, my mother moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in another city. That not only relieves the pressure on us to house her, but also helps keep her safe. This is the best possible news for my brother and me because the wedding date is getting closer and we didn't want it to be overshadowed by our parents. Some things did happen though. My mother managed to recover some of the items that were missing the day we went to the house. My father had hidden them, but after the list was submitted, he returned them to avoid more trouble. It wasn't everything, but he swears he doesn't have the rest. It's possible my mother lost them earlier and doesn't remember. In other news, my father has lost his job. He has been drinking more than usual because now he has no limiting factor. That limiter was my mother, who even with everything still kept his drinking lower than it could have been. Now she's gone, and he hasn't gone to work in weeks. We know this because a neighbor found him one morning sleeping upright against his garden fence. He had also been smoking, because there was a burned-out cigarette on his shirt that must have fallen when he passed out and burned through the fabric until it went out. He reeked of alcohol, and when the neighbor woke him, he said he had no job, no wife, no children, and that his life no longer mattered. The neighbor called the police, and they took him somewhere to monitor him for 48 hours because they were afraid he might harm himself. The divorce is ongoing. Even though my father never got his own lawyer, my mother wants them to sell the family home and split the money evenly to start over. I just hope this story, which began with a wedding and is ending with a divorce, doesn't have many more insane chapters. Update 5. I hope this is my last update, because I never want to see more craziness like this again. My father became sober enough, maybe those 48 hours under supervision helped, because he got a lawyer and started fighting the divorce. He tried to use my mother's infidelity as a reason for her to get nothing in the divorce, but that's not how things work. She argued that not only had he forgiven her for it, but that he had been violent toward her, presenting all the evidence from the last few months. They eventually reached a property division that was basically nothing. My father had spent all the money he could, probably on alcohol, expensive alcohol, and also caused significant damage to the property, which if it's ever sold will be worth much less. It's basically a full renovation project, because besides my father's damage, there was also major wear and tear, so it's a huge undertaking and my mother won't get what she thought she would. Her lawyer managed to get the division ruled in her favor, but at the same time my father doesn't even have a job. His wages could be garnished in the future only if he gets registered employment, which given his addiction and his lack of willingness to pay is unlikely to ever happen. His only option is to sell the house, even at foreclosure-level prices, but I have my doubts. We've gone no contact with our mother again, not because of anything specific that happened, but simply to keep our word from before everything unfolded. I know some people weren't happy that we helped her, and others weren't happy that we didn't help her 100%. Since it's impossible to please everyone, I've stopped caring. We know all of this thanks to our mother's cousin, who also told us that she has found a job and is trying to move forward. We still don't know why she didn't do that before, when she could have given us a better life, but I think the same about my father, and I know I'll never get an answer to that. My brother got married, and as expected, neither of our parents was invited. We were afraid my father might do something, so I offered to pay for a security guard to be there all day just in case. It wasn't necessary, but it was the best gift I could give them. It wasn't the only one, but giving them a day of peace and harmony is worth more than a stupid coffee maker. I hope that's it, and that there's no more craziness from my parents on the horizon. Edit, the house has been sold. My mother received a little over $15,000 and the rest, I don't know how much, went to my father. We thought it would be money for her to start her new life, but in reality she had already accumulated several credit card debts during this year she lived with her cousin, so most of the money went to paying those off. Otherwise no one would rent her a place with such bad credit, which is bad for her cousin, who is probably counting the days until she leaves, even if she hasn't said it. As for my father, I know nothing. He had been living in the house until it was sold and then disappeared. It's not like I had contact with him before, but at least we knew where he was. If I'm honest, I haven't seen him or known anything about him for over a year now.